This is Gemara Menachos, Daf Lamed Aleph. I'm holding a Lamed Amid Beis. We pulled up about 5 lines from the wide lines in the middle of a discussion with Rav Yosi ben Kippur, trying to figure out exactly whom he goes like. We're going to go a little bit up because it was a horrible place to stop. So let's rewind a little bit. Let's go a little bit higher in the Amid. Hopefully, as they say, we'll make up time in the air. Amar Rav Chanina halacha kirshim mitzuri. Amar Ravin bar Chanina halacha kirshim shezuri. Amar Ula Amar Rav Chanina halacha kirshim shezuri. V'lo ayid al komag shishanu shim shezuri halacha kamaisi. So we're passing like halacha kirshim shezuri, and whenever we see Rav Shim Shezuri, we paskin like him. That's the larger statement that we're trying to figure out what exactly is going on over here. And now within that, we will now go on a journey to try to figure out which statement of halacha of Rav Shimon Shezuri are we referring to. Says the Gemara, on which din of Rav Shimon Shezuri did Rav Chanina say this? If it's on the following case, Rav Shimon Shezuri Omer, Kol Hashem Kulei Toilin, which is our sugya, that you're allowed to have the name of Hashem between the lines, mixaso in Tailin, but part of it we cannot. But we learned it's not so pashit. Amar Rav Chanan Amar Rav Lach Tailin. It says Shem Rav Chanan Rav Yitzchak Ber Shema Lacha Moichek v'Koisev. That you should erase and write of him Isa who Namilesa. We should have said this as well. So says the Gemara, that can't be the case. We have to find a new case. Elaha. Now this is really where we take a left turn. Because right now, this has nothing to do with our sugya. We brought in this whole case. Why? Because we thought it was Halacha Krishim Shezuri in the case of having the Shem Hashem suspended between the lines. Now we bring in, just trying to find the Rishim Shezuri, and now we go into other areas. And that's exactly where we are holding. So if you look at your screen, it's the part that the highlight just disappeared. El afilu, Shin Shezuri Aimer, afilu, let's get our highlighter out. Shim Shezuri Aimer, afilu, maybe third time's the chime. Afilu ben Chamei Shanim v'chayrish b'asadeh, shchitas imoi mitarasa. A complicated sugya ben pakua, but even if it's 5-year-olds, the shchita of the mother makes it mitarasa, makes it tar. Hoyetim along, we learned on this. Ziiri Amar of Chanina Lacha. Here it is. Kirshim Shezuri says the Gemara of Emisahu Nami Leima. So if it's true that Rav Chanina said that we pass like Shim Shezuri in this case, then Rav and Bar Chanina should also say it together with Zeiri. We said Zeiri Amar Rav Chanina. It should have been everyone. Says Gemara attempt number 3. Elaha Barishaina. And again, we're still on the journey to find the Shim Shezuri, and we're still making this left turn, finding the case that has nothing to do with our sugya. Elaha. Then they said, even if someone is not tied up, but rather one is going out overseas and he leaves in a caravan, even if he's dangerously ill, says Gemara Nachmal, Inami, or Rav Chanina said his din, Chumas Meis Shal Demai, Shachazra Limekaima. Rav Shim Shezuri Aimer, Av Bechol, Shayala, V'oichla Alpiv. That even during the week, you could ask and eat based on which the Moicher tells you is the status of this produce, and we're discussing Demai produce that we're unsure whether the Amaretz was mafresh appropriate Trumais and Maisris. Says the Gemara can't be. Voyetmar alam Rav Yechanan alacha ki Rav Shimon Shezuri b'mesukan u'b'trumas meiser shel demai enacham v'misa. And if it's true, hunami lema, let him add on this case as well. So now we try again, number 4. Elaha Rav Yosi ben Kippur, Mishom Rav Shimon Shezuri, Paul HaMitzri. Now this is it. This is a new case. We don't read this bechlal. So let's go. Paul HaMitzri were 4 lines, 4 lines from the wide lines. Paul HaMitzri says, Zarai Lezera Miksasai, Hishis L'nei Rosh Hashanah, Miksasai Achar Rosh Hashanah. if this pula mitchi, this Egyptian bean, that you planted it for the seed, some of it takes root before Rosh Hashanah, some of it takes root after Rosh Hashanah. What's the halacha? Ein tarmim mizeh al zeh. We cannot separate truma from one part for the other. Lefi shein tarmim u'maiser lo min hachadash al yashan v'lo min yashan al chadash. The trumas and meisers has to all be its requisite crop, its requisite year, and it can't be that you're separating from a different year for that year. So therefore, it will not work. So Ketzid Yases, what should you do on the first wide line? Soiber garnoi l'toichei. What you should do is you pile everything into the middle of the threshing floor. V'nim sater meiser min hachadash sheboi. And now it's going to come out, since everything is in one big mixture. Then you take off the chumas and meisters. So now what comes out is you're separating for the good, the new on the new, for the old on the old. Says the Gemara, but we learned on this. And Nachamal v'Misa, and if this was the case that Rav Chanina said that we pass like Rav Shimon Shezuri, Hunami Lema, then Rav and Bar Chanina b'Shem Ula should also say together with Rav Yechanan. It's really the same kasha, the same theme again and again. They keep on finding that they're not adding on, and if this was the case that we pass like Rav Shimon Shezuri, they should have said it explicitly. Ella Amar Rapap Ashida, says Rapap on the case of a carriage. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Amar Ayayin on the case of wine. What is a carriage? What is wine? Rapap Amar Ashida, says the Gemara as we turn over to Lamid Aleph Amid Aleph. Rapap Amar Ashida Dan Ashida Beishami Ayrim Nim Dead Das Mi Bifnin Beisel Amrim Mi Bachotz. We have a case of a carriage, a Mishnah in Kalim, a complicated Mishnah. And we're trying to figure out, how are we nimdad? How do we measure the carriage? A carriage used by a woman. And now the question is, klabe being mitame, other items, that if we have a large wooden utensil, like a shida, a carriage, they're not mikabel tama if they're a requisite size. What's that size? Large enough to hold mem sa, as you see in Rashi on the second line, belach, she'ein kurayim, which is 2 kur, be ya veish. Yatzuviter is kli, and the ravein mikabel in tama, they're not going to be mikabel tama. So this carriage, how do you measure it? Beis Shammai says we go with inner dimensions. The 40 sa does not include the carriage himself, then therefore it won't be makabel tov if it's the size, and it'll be tahira. Whereas Beis Hillel says mibachot, but they both admit elavilu she'ein oivei haraglayim v'oivei halavzazin nimdad. They both agree that the thickness of the legs and the lips are not part of the measurement. The legs and the lips are that which goes on the top of the carriage. So that part, they both agree, is not part of the measurements. That's machlokes Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, where they agree. Rav Yosi Omer says, Rav Yosi Moedim, she'oivei raglayim v'oivei lavzavzin nimdad, that they are, yes, measure with them. Ubeinehem ein nimdad. But what is between them is not. Rabbi Shimon Shezuri Omer, and here it is. If they're a tefach high, then in beinayam nindad. Then between them is not measured vimlav. Then yes, beinayam nindad. So says the Gemara. So this, Rav Papa says, this is the case in which Rav Chanina said that we paskin like Rav Shimon Shezuri, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Ayayin. Again, we have 2 different cases. One was Ashida. That was case number 1 that we just explained of the carriage, which has to do how do you measure it. Rav Shimon Shezuri teaching us a certain qualification as to the size of the raglayim. Comes along Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and he says no. The case is klape wine. Titinan Rabbi Meir Omer shemen tchilam leoilam. Olive oil is a tchila, is always a tchila. What does it mean it's a tchila? It means it's a rishon latoma. V'chachamim oimrim, and chachamim say avadvash. Shim Shezuri oimer avayayin. So we have a three-way machlekes. What is something that is always a tchila? If we look at Rashi, Rashi says, Peishenitma ba'avatama, oy berishain, oy b'sheni. We know there's different levels within tuma. So whether it touches an av, whether it touches a risha, whether it touches a sheni, avi iho rishain itself stays at the status of a rishain. And this is the Gemara in Pesachim that we learn in Kalapayis Shuma Mitami Mashke Leo Schila V'Shem Mashk. So a three-way machlokes is that dafka by yayin? Is it also by shemen, or is it? Excuse me. Is it by shemen? Is it by devash, or is it even by yayin? So says the Gemara Tanakama Savar yayin loy. So it sounds like Tanakama holds not by wine. So we see, but the question is why? Says the Gemara, you're right. Eimer Shim Shizui Eimer Yayin. Shim Shizui says just wine, not afilu yayin. Meaning, Rishim Shizuri is arguing on the previous tonight. They're saying also shemen. They're saying also devash. Shim Shizuri says no, just yayin. That's going to be the case in which it's always a rishain, and this is the case that Chanina said. We paskin like Rav Shimon Shizuri, and this is the end of really yesterday's shir. So we're looking for the case in which we pass like Rav Shimon Shizuri. We found it. It's either the case of the Shida or the case of the Yayin. But now, once we went down this rabbit hole, and once we already figured out where Rav Shimon Shizuri applies, we continue similarly. Tanya Amar Rav Shimon Shizuri smack in the middle of the Amid. Pa'amachas necessarily Tevel bechulin one time. Tevel, things that did not have Chumas and Maises mixed, got mixed with chulin. Ubasi, and what happened? V'shalti is Rabbi Tarfin. V'amar li lech, and he said to me, lech kach lecha min hashuk v'aser lav. Go buy from the shuk and take off meiser from it. Says the Gemara, what does Tarfin mean? Kosav Arield. You know what he held? Daraisa berubai batal. He held midaraisa. The tevel fell into the chulin. It's bottled midaraisa once it's roif. And the roif amaret me'aisrim. And now we have a second roif that the majority do indeed take of meiser. V'havale ketayim min apater ala pater. And therefore, it's like a case that midaraisa you're separating truma, something which is pater, and something else which is pater. And halacha is, excuse me, to take off from butter to butter is going to be kosher. The reason is because they're both midaraisa, both batal and midaraisa. We assume that the Amaretz did indeed separate the truma. So says the Gemara, v'lei malei. So why did Rav Tarfin not say kach min ha'akum? Why didn't he say go buy from a guy? Why did he say go buy from the shuk? Says, you know why? Because ein kinyan la'akum eretz Yisrael. There's a difference, because a guy does not have a kinyan eretz Yisrael afkiyam yen ma'aser, and therefore and therefore that which the guy owns as a chiyuv midaraisa. So would not have worked. Ikadi another lashain. Amar leikach min ha'akum because avi ish kinyan ha'akum be'eretz Yisrael la'afkiyam yen ma'aser. Says Gemara, okay, so why did he not give the other suggestion according to the Amri? So two different Lashainis, whether we hold the Roiv Amaratim or Maestrim, or whether we hold the Ishkini La'akum, Lavkia, Midei, Miad, Meiser. Says the Gemara, Shalach Le Rav Yemar, 6 lines in the bottom, Bar Shalmaya Le Rav Papa. That which he said, Allah Shim Shizuri, Veloy Oid, Ella Kal Makar, Shem Shizuri, Allah Kamaisai. Af binis Arab le Tavel b'chulin. Is this even in the case when Tavel was mixed with chulin? Amar le in. Yes, we still basing of Shem Shizuri in that case. Amar Ravashi, Amar li Marzucha, Kasha beira Chalina Misura. Chalina Asura was wondering, Pshita, What are you asking? Do we also passing of Shimshon Zuri in this case? Yes, Avada, that is what Rav Chanina meant. Halachic of Shimshon Zuri. Avada, also in this case. So why are you coming to single out this case? Say, by the way, does this case satisfy your requirements that we also passing of Shimshon Zuri? Of course, that's exactly what he was saying. Says the Gemara, Mika Amar Mishtasenu. Does it say, as we turn over to Lamed Alpha Mebeis, does it say Lachlik Rishim Shizuri whenever a Tana says it in our Mishnah? It doesn't. And therefore, Kol Makom Sheshana Kamar. Wherever he said it, therefore there was no real reason to ask whether we also ask in like Rishim Shizuri in this case. Now we go back. It was a little bit of a left turn segue as we got involved in Rishim Shizuri, as we thought that there was relevance to his discussion, to our discussion of writing the Shem Hashem in a Sefer Torah, in between the lines. Now we go back. Amar Rav Zeira, Amar Rav Chananel, Amar Rav. Kara, Kera haba b'shnei shitin. If a tier in the Torah extends 2 lines into the writing, Yitvar can be sewn up, but if the tier goes even further, al Yitvar. Amrle Rabba Zuti, the Rav Ashi, Hachi Amar, Rav Yirmiyah B'tifti Mishmei Derava. That which we just said, that if the tier extends into the Ksaf, 3 lines, you should not sew it up. Le'amarn is not Ela Ba'atiksa, is only with old parchment. Why? Rashi says, because if it's old parchment, it doesn't look so nice. And that's the reason, Migna Kriya, and that's the reason why we can't do it. Aval Chadata, if it's a new Torah, if it's new parchment, less lanba, even if the tier extends 3 lines, you could sew it up. And when we say it's old, we don't mean it's mamish old. We say it's new, we don't mean it's mamish new. We should remember this back from our Gemara in Gittin days. The gallnuts, rather, new parchment means it was not treated with gallnut juice. Old parchment means it was treated with gallnut juice. And the nafkamina is that when it's treated with the gallnut juice, it becomes a bissel black, bissel dark, and therefore it doesn't look as nice. And says the Gemara, "V'ani mili begidin avol begardin loy." And this is all talking about sewing it up with sinews. Avol begaradin loy, but sewing up with threads. Cannot. That, just like you have to sew up between the 2 pieces of parchment with a sinew, with a gidin, so too you have to do the tiers the same way. You can't sew it up bechlal with a regular thread. So, Rav Yehuda bar Abba, bein daf ledaf, bein shita l'shita mau. What if we have a tier between dafim or between lines? Can you sew it up? Says the Gemara. Good kasha. Teku. We got to wait for Eliyahu Navi for that one. And now we pivot from Hilchas Sefer Torah, Hilchas Ksav, into the mitzvah of mezuzah. Omar Rav Zeiri, Omar Rav Chananel, Omar Rav. Mezuzah shekasu shtayim ksheira. Mezuzah that was written 2 by 2, 2 words in every line, it's kosher. Frakti Gemari bailu shtayim ushalosh va'achas mahu. What if it's written 2 words on one line, 3 words on the next line, 1 word on the following line? Is that kosher? Amar Rav Nachman, yes, a kosher gain. Shasag sheira. All the more so, because then it looks more like kishira. All the more so, it looks like a poem, and therefore that is kosher. It looks like Oz Yashir, it's written in the brick stage, and that's going to be fine. So it made it like a poem, made a poem like it. Pisula. It's possible. So why telling me it's kosher? Kitanya b'sefer Torah. It's Bernami Amar Rav Chana Amar Rav Yochanan Amar Amar Rav Acha Bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan. Mezuzah shasah shtayim v'shalosh v'achas ksheiro b'lvad shayasenu kikoiva. It's only if it's not made like a tent. Or b'lvad shayasenu kizanav, cannot make it like a tail. What's a tent? That's wide at the bottom and top and narrow at the top. You can't go. We said you go 3, 2, 1. If you look at Rashi over here shows that a kuba, a tent, is you go 1, and then you do 2, and then you do 3. That's going to be a problem. Or shleyasen kizanav, it can be made like a tail, which is wide on the top and narrow on the bottom. It can't be 3, 2, 1. Can't be shalosh shtayim va'achas kazeh, shalosh shtayim va'achas kazeh. That cannot be. So if you're just wondering, so what could it be? Let's just go back for a moment. It was shtayim v'shalosh va'achas. 2, 3, 1, that was allowed. That was more like a poem. But 3, 2, 1 is like a tail. 1 through 3 is like a tent. And those are not allowed. Amar Rav Chisda, al ha'aretz. B'shita achrayna, the last word of the mezuzah al ha'aretz has to be on its own line. Igad yamri b'soif shita. Some say it has to be at the end of the last line. Igad yamri b'tchila shita. At the beginning of the last line, but it has to be the last line, and the rest of the line left blank. So mandam b'soif shita k'gvay shemayim al ha'aretz. It's written that what the word k'gvaya shamayim al ha'aretz, that the word shamayim is on top of the word aretz, that the day should be like the height of the heaven over the earth. Mandam rabbi tzchila shita keichid demercha shamayim v'aretz. You want it to be far away from shamayim v'aretz. That's to do with what the previous line was. We'll conclude with two more halachas about a mezuzah. Rav Chelboi chazina leil Rav Huna dekarach le me'echad kalape shema. As Rav Huna, he would roll the mezuzah from echad to shema. Va'isa parshiyosel setumais, and he would make the parshiyos setumais that we know breaks at the end of it. Meisvei asked the Gemara, we should stop here. This is going to go on to the next summit. Let's stop over here. We'll pick it up from Rav Chelbo Nachum the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.